I'm just going to assume that the people that wrote this bill have good intentions. I'm assuming that right now, that the people who wrote this bill really truly believe that it will help people. They're just clueless. All I'm doing here is educating people. I'm not trying to scare anyone. I'm not trying to make allegations of conspiracy. I'm just saying that governments do not have the power to override the basic principles of economics. They don't. That the laws of economics do not care about your good intentions. So with that, I've already talked about all the problems that are going to happen as a result of the health care bill. Now, as promised last time, I'm going to go over solutions, real solutions, to help bring health care costs back down to hopefully reasonable levels, if not a lot, at least somewhat of a help. And what you'll notice is that these solutions that I'm giving you have a theme in common to them. You might notice a trend among these solutions. So here they are. How many of you out there knew that there are right now in the United States, there are actual laws against importing cheaper prescription drugs? How many of you out there actually knew that? I didn't find out until a couple months ago. It is literally illegal to buy inexpensive drugs. It's illegal. You're not allowed to import them from Mexico.
That's probably part of the war on drugs horse shit.
Right. You go to Mexico, where the war on drugs is raging, and you could get the same prescription drugs that you would here at maybe a tenth of the price, and the quality would be exactly the same. I don't know how many of you have been to the Mexican border recently, but if you cross the border, you will be inundated with pharmacies everywhere. I mean, on every block, every other store is a pharmacy, and that is simply to meet the demand of all the Americans crossing the border to get the cheaper prescriptions, because they cannot afford the expensive American stuff, and U.S. law prevents them from buying the cheaper stuff. So right there, that's one solution. Repeal the laws that ban importing cheaper drugs, and the cost of your medical care will go down. That's one solution right there. Let's talk about another one. How many of y'all knew this? If a doctor, just a normal practitioner, family doctor, chooses to advertise their services, like say if they take out an advertisement, a TV spot, what have you, they run the risk of losing their license. Seriously, if a doctor wants to advertise, like if they want to say, my rates are lower than Dr. X, or my wait times are less than Dr. X, or I spend more time than Dr. X with the patient, they are in danger of losing their license. Now, I want you to think about that for a second, what kind of perverse incentives that creates. And again, that's that phrase I introduced to you last week, perverse incentives. In other words, what kind of unintended consequences does that create? Well, let's think about that. If a doctor is not allowed to advertise, it's much more difficult for a consumer to make a choice about which doctor is better. In other words, the competition between doctors is not as severe as it would be before, which means their prices go up and their quality of care goes down.
Because of the licensing.
At the same time, if you as a doctor don't have to worry about advertising, my rates are less than that doctor, or my wait times are less than that doctor, if you don't have to worry about bragging about those things, you don't have as much of an incentive to actually do those things. If you're not allowed to brag about how low your prices are, what incentive do you have to really lower prices? If you're not allowed to brag about how quick and how the quality of your service, what's really the incentive to actually invest the time and effort to do that if you can't brag about it and get more customers as a result of it? So right there's another thing that can be repealed. Take away the prohibitions on advertising between doctors will force them to be more competitive. Their prices will go down, the quality of care will go up, because they are now competing with each other more directly. There's been a law in the books for quite some time now prohibiting insurance companies from selling policies across state lines. Think about what this does, what this law does. When you limit a consumer's choices, you're basically limiting the supply, is what you're doing. In other words, the supply is getting less. Because supply gets less, price goes up. That's basic supply and demand. So if you're wondering why these sorts of regulations are in place to prevent people from buying insurance across state lines, it is specifically so that they can charge more, so they don't have to compete with as many other health insurers. So once again, that's another thing that could be done. You could repeal that law and allow insurance companies to offer policies across state lines. Most doctors are required by law to carry medical malpractice insurance. They have to carry this insurance at all times. Now, you may think that that's a good thing, but what it ends up doing is making them a target for litigation. And the doctors that actually are forced to carry this are often much more often victimized by frivolous lawsuits and doctors that do not have to carry this insurance. Because if you're going to sue a doctor, you feel much better about it or much less guilty about it if you knew that their insurance was going to pay for it. And judges feel much less guilty about awarding huge sums of money if they know that the insurance is going to pay for it. And the thing is, if a doctor is being forced to carry this malpractice insurance, anytime any other doctor on this policy, any other doctor gets sued, everybody's rates goes up. In other words, doctors are all being punished for the malpractice of other doctors because they're all being tied together on this insurance system. So that's another thing right there you could do. You could repeal the requirement for doctors to carry malpractice insurance. That would send healthcare rates even lower. Last solution, but certainly not all of them. I can think of a million ways to do this. These are just the top 5 and probably the least controversial that I could think of. There have been, for probably about 150, 160 years now, legal limitations on the number of doctors allowed to enter practice in the country. They do this through licensing. Licensing restricts the number of doctors allowed to practice. Now, obviously, once again, supply and demand. You've got a lower supply of doctors that translates to higher prices. And someone argue that's why the licensing was introduced in the first place, that doctors felt they weren't being paid enough, so they used licensing to sort of cut off their competition and keep the group of doctors as small as possible so they can charge as much money as possible. Now, you may think that licensing is a good thing, that it prevents, say, quack doctors from operating or people without the proper skills from operating. But in the long run, there's a lot more negative consequences to licensing than there are positive consequences. Now, sure, like I said, you may help to eliminate some of the quack doctors. But at the same time, now that there's less doctors, the price goes up. Because the price goes up, people are less likely to be able to afford medical care in the first place.
I'm personally against all licensing.
Right. Yeah.
Whether it's real estate or
right.
anything.
Right. And then people are worried.
Actually, licensing is a form of communism.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, and people are worried about the quality of doctors. They think they need licensing to guarantee the quality of doctors. Well, no, you don't. Competition will guarantee that.
Yeah.
What licensing guarantees is that everything will be more costly and there will be less of it. That's what licensing guarantees. It doesn't actually guarantee that the quality of the doctor will go up. As I mentioned already, the price will go up. You're less likely to be able to afford it, which means you're less likely to have access in the first place. So what does it matter if they're licensed or not if you can't even afford it? The other thing is, as I mentioned before, if doctors are less competitive because there's less of them, they're less inclined to do a good job when it comes time to treating you. They will care less about you. They will spend less time on you. Quality will go down. So licensing may be designed to increase the quality of care, but in the long run it actually decreases the quality because doctors just don't have the inclination and don't have the time to do a proper job.